Hi, Jim Romer, Dr. Weather, August 29th. Going to talk to you about the hurricane season so far. That's been a little bit weaker than expected by most firms, including NOAA a month or two ago. It could pick up certainly later on this fall. We'll talk about all the different factors that affect hurricane development. So, obviously, ocean temperatures are very important. Which teleconnections, like La Nina, for example, are most associated with an active hurricane season? What is omega? Vertical motion. How has it influenced tropical development? We'll compare this present season through the end of August and beginning of September, which looks relatively inactive. Maybe another hurricane out in the Atlantic within a week or two, but nothing major hitting landfall at least till the middle part of September. Comparing this to the active 2005 season, again, it's the anniversary of Hurricane Katrina from 2005 and also 2004's relatively strong season. The conclusion, not out of the woods yet, but on average, we do expect below normal hurricanes compared to the last 2 or 3 years, unless something drastically changes here in the next 8 weeks. So, first of all, one of the main drivers of hurricane activity, of course, is the warm ocean and Gulf waters. Notice the red still in the Gulf of Mexico, well above normal. That could still mean some pretty big storms later in September and October. But the cooling out there in the Atlantic, what's called the AMO index, in part because of a Hurricane Erin bringing cooler upwelling out in the Atlantic about a week ago, and also cooling oceans off the coast of West Africa has reduced some of the hurricane activity by this time of the year. La Nina is actually going to be forming maybe a weak one here over the next month or two, and that tends to reduce shear and could create a more active end of the season later in September and October. Here's some of the analog years when you have cooling water, sort of the opposite of the last few years there in the Eastern Atlantic. Some of these analog years, most of them actually had below number of hurricanes. One of the strong seasons, of course, was back in 2000. Looking again at these particular analog years, we do see it's kind of a little bit difficult to see here on the charts, but the lower right, 2000 did have 15 named storms, relatively strong ACE, cyclone energy across much of the Atlantic. The other years there had somewhat below normal activity. So, one of the strongest teleconnections to predict hurricane strength and activity during September and October is the NAO index, the block over Greenland. That warm block there you see in red is creating one of the coolest August in recent memory for the eastern half of the country. The correlation there on the right, when you have actually a positive NAO index, right now it's negative, a positive NAO index, which is a cool vortex, low pressure near Greenland, that tends to actually increase hurricane activity. Right now, the index is negative. That means below normal activity. A negative NAO correlated with below normal activity. And other teleconnections that are very, very important has to do with the Atlantic Ocean, the central Atlantic. When it's very warm, you have a positive correlation. You see there 0.6 of active hurricane activity. Right now, the Atlantic's been cooling. One of the reasons we are seeing somewhat below normal activity right now. Another key teleconnection is a tropical Atlantic South Atlantic index, cooling in the Gulf of Guinea off the southwest coast of Africa. You can see here the cooling actually creating below normal hurricane activity. When it's warm, that correlation is plus 0.44. So again, the warm Atlantic, the warm central areas off the Gulf of Guinea there, the warm Gulf of Mexico. When it's warm, obviously, there's a lot more juice for hurricane development, less shear. But you're seeing that some of these areas are cooler than normal right now, and that's one of the reasons why the hurricane season is not quite as strong as predicted a month or two ago. How about upward vertical motion? That's important for hurricane development. Well, look at that back in 2005, negative omega, upward vertical motion. Storms form, hurricanes form from thunderstorms at 60 to 70,000 feet sometimes. Look how in blue, negative omega, upward vertical motion really increased the hurricane season. Right now, though, it's kind of in orange or yellow there. Not as much upward vertical motion. So upward vertical motion tends to create storms, hurricane development as the winds tend to rise, the air cools aloft and creates lots of thunderstorms. Right now, once again, to the right, we are seeing that the upward vertical motion is not as strong as it was last year and certainly there on the left, like 2005. Shear is also important right now. Look at that back in 2024 last year, they were in white, and 2005 all across the Gulf Coast and Atlantic. Low shear, less than 10 knots of wind. High shear tends to knock off the top of thunderstorms and reduce hurricane activity. Right now, to the right there, you can see that in red, there are some areas of high shear off the coast of West Africa, where the reason tropical waves have been weaker than normal and also in some other areas in the Caribbean and Gulf. But that could change in the Gulf as we get into later September and October. So also the high pressure ridge there in the Eastern Atlantic has been really, really strong. That ridge, whether it's over Bermuda, that tends to steer hurricanes in the Florida or the Gulf, or further north there right now, that tends to steer hurricanes more out in the Atlantic off the coast of Georgia and North and South Carolina. Another one likely here in early September. The stronger that high is, and the further north hurricanes go, typically out in the Atlantic, and also more African dust tends to come off the coast of the Sahara. As you see there in red, that strong high pressure system creating more African dust. Another reason, as well as cool ocean temperatures and positive omega, less upward vertical motion, has reduced the number of tropical waves off the west coast of Africa. Look at that back in 2024 to the left, not quite as strong a high pressure system there in Atlantic. And also in 2005, even weaker. And as a result, you didn't have as much African dust coming off the coast of the Sahara. And the storms tend to be pretty strong. Many, many hurricanes, both in 2025, or 2024 rather, and of course in 2005. So the most active part of the hurricane season usually is in early to mid-September through the end of October. And as you can see there on the lower left, the hurricanes and tropical storms tend to originate more in the Gulf Coast and the Yucatan Peninsula compared to June, July, and August. More of them come off the west coast of Africa and tend to go into the Caribbean. But you can see how that situation does change in October. So as a result, with a weak La Nina forming, it's possible that shear will tend to be really weak in the Gulf of Mexico in the next 4 to 6 weeks. And with the warm ocean temperatures still in the Gulf, not as much so in the Atlantic, storms could explode later in September and October. And that means we're not out of the woods yet as far as a major hurricane hitting maybe Texas or Louisiana or Florida later on in September or in October. But for right now, we do expect relatively tame uh, storm across the East Coast and the Gulf for the next couple weeks or so. Any other hurricane that forms before the 10th or 12th of September will be mainly out in the Atlantic. Thank you.